everyone, my name is Amy, and in this tutorial I'm going to be showing you the basic foundations for Photoshop, the ones you will need in order to succeed in Yearbook. So we're going to start off by opening Photoshop, and to open up your work file, you're going to go to File, New, and usually it will open up by saying default Photoshop size, but that is not what we want, not for Yearbook. So you go to Custom, your width for every page or whatever work you have, it will always be 17. Your height will always be 11, and the resolution should always be 300. So those are going to be your parameters for every file you ever make. Then you click OK, and though it looks small, you can always make it a little bigger by pressing Command 0. So one of the things you need to learn is how to make your guidelines. So your guidelines, they usually serve the purpose of borders. So if you go over those borders, there's a slight possibility that that work will be cut off from the rest of the page. So just make sure that your guidelines are always set so that it's easier to know if you're going over the border or not. And if you do go over the border, don't worry. There's always the possibility that it will still come out. So don't stress too much about that. So your guidelines, they are 0.5 away from the edge. So you have 4 edges, and each guideline will be 0.5 away from the entire size. So for example, the first guide is going to be a vertical 0.5, and that's going to appear on your left. The new guide, the one on the right, remember that the total width is 17. Therefore, this will be 16.5. For your horizontal edges, you're going to press New Guide again, and you're going to do the same process, except now you're just going to put horizontal. And then you're going to do the same for this, because the total height is 11, and then just put horizontal and OK. You're also going to need 3 middle guidelines. So those are going to be the inseam of the book. That's where you turn the page, so those things won't usually come out. So the vertical guidelines for this are 8, 8.5, and 9. So this is always, you're going to be your guidelines. You should always use them just to make sure where you are in your work. And you can always make them disappear by pressing Command:. So that'll disappear, and you can come back and you can do the same thing. Another thing that's crucial to knowing if your work is consistent is by pressing Command:, and that'll bring up a grid that's most helpful when you need to size things, or if you know that things are lined up, or if one thing is smaller than the other, just to make sure that there's consistency rather than just eyeballing it and making it look messy. So whenever you have the chance, always try to use the grid lines. These will help you to make sure that everything is lined up. Then there will be no confusion, or you don't have to eyeball it or stress too much about that. And you can always make that disappear by pressing Command:. For every work you do, you should always try to separate the layers. So if you're making additions to your file, try to always make a layer. So for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to show you some basic Photoshop tools, and always try to name your layers according to the content of that layer. So for example, we're going to draw a circle, so I'm going to name my layer Circle. So to do that, you're going to go to your marquee, and if you press long enough, you'll get these other options, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to do the elliptical marquee, and you just drag it out, and you can color it whatever you want. So what the marquee does, it isolates that spot from everything else. So even if if you choose to brush, you can't go over, even though you see my mouse going off the border, it's still within that range. However, if you want to make your life easier, you can always go to Paint Bucket tool, and it'll do the exact same thing. So in order to remove that, you're going to go to Select, Deselect. However, if you just want to do the same thing, but with the Paint Bucket tool, you'll just do the marquee, and you're going to do paint bucket. And that's your circle. And select, please select. So the same thing goes for these. They do the same thing except it's different shapes. Now, the lasso tool does the exact same thing except that it's more of a freehand kind of thing. So for example, if you want to do the same, it will do the same function. It will make a selection, but you can do it freehand. So for example, if you want to do that, and that's your selection. And if you want to get creative, you can always use the gradient tool. Just follow my mouse. And if you need these things to be slower, just remember you feel free to go back or forward, whatever you need in order to get this. And so you're going to click on one end and end in the other. And it'll create that cool gradient effect. And always select, then deselect. So I've already showed you the basic functions of a marquee, a lasso, a brush tool, the paint bucket, and the gradient tool. So just be aware, that most of these are pretty straightforward. For example, see, that's the eraser. It does what an eraser does. And as you progress through Yearbook, you will come to know more tools that are a little more advanced. For example, the pen tool. That personally was the one that took me the longest to learn. So like always, we're going to make a new layer. We're going to name it pen tool drawing. And in order to do this, just make sure, okay, so you're going to click on that one point, which I just did. And for the purposes of this, we're going to make like a football kind of thing. So on the other side, you're going to press here, but don't let go. So click and hold and drag it out to the shape that you want. When you're done with that, you let go. You can press Alt or Option, it's in the same button, and bring this same little point back to its origin. And then you'll make another point back to where you started. Well, something like that. And then you'll press Control, click on your drawing, and make the selection. So it does the same thing a marquee does, except it's more precise and it's easier when you're trying to crop out photos. So, but if you ever need help, feel free to ask anyone and they'll help you. Like always, you can be creative, you can pick different colors, different size, and it'll be a really cool effect. So, like I mentioned, throughout your progress, you'll learn how to use different tools, and don't be afraid to ask. And the text, it's the same thing. However, just keep in mind that the text will make a layer of its own. So see how that made a layer 1 without me doing that. And then you'll just type whatever it is that you want. You can change the font, change the size, the color, so on and so forth. So that's pretty straightforward. But that's it for this tutorial. Thank you for listening and watching, and I hope to see you next year in Yearbook. Thank you. Bye.